And hello again. This is Jonathan McGuinness from Questions of Fire. I'm delighted to introduce you to episode 16, where we have a lady who I've had the fortunate pleasure of meeting before in person. And let me introduce you before we get into anything and welcome Susan Gunner. Susan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Excellent. I'd just like to introduce to the people who are new to the Questions of Fire. Every week on a Wednesday, we have a new guest who brings a new dimension into people who are driven. What drives them? What does it? And some of them are very externally focused. And I think we're going to take a change of pace because knowing about Susan, she's very much interested into the internal journey in silence, in psychedelics, where we go in our mind and in our soul. And first of all, maybe I'll just pass over directly to you, Susan. How did you come to the point now where you have a big group? I think you have 1,000 people there recently from, a few years ago, before we met, that you didn't take the limelight as such. What's happened to bring you to this point, Susan?
Yes, it's a good question. I think we all know what this is. I think we all have an idea of the answer. I think a lot of us, we have a driving force that helps us make the change. And sometimes the driving force is usually the pain. So we don't actually do anything until we suffer enough. And when I say suffer enough, that's a perceived suffering, emotional suffering I'm talking about, when you just had enough. And yes, we do know that there are lots of things we need to change, but the change, unfortunately, doesn't come either until we suffer enough, or at least we change through inspiration, aspiration. But most of the time it's pain. So my driver was pain.
So yeah, I can confirm that. I went to a lot of Tony Robbins, and he has a very famous saying: we do 99% of the things because of desperation and 1% because of inspiration. So obviously then you're saying, okay, well, it was pain in something that's brought you to using these modalities of meditation and psychedelics, which we'll get into now in a few minutes. What brought you to those paths, Susan? Why did you choose meditation, psychedelics, and other things that you have, we'll say, in your portfolio or your tool set?
Yeah, good question. So from a very young age, I worked with people. I facilitated a lot for people without knowing it was facilitating, and also holding space, because I encountered a very dramatic process in my life when I was a kid, where I had to facilitate for my grandmother. She was suffering from a host of all types of mental illnesses.
Okay, yeah.
So that was my first initiation into realizing that life is suffering. And it was my first-hand experiencing that people around me are suffering. Grown-ups are suffering, basically. And it wasn't just my grandma. Then I became very observant. I started observing a lot of people around me, only to realize, wow, life is lived in pain. I didn't have these abstract concepts then, but deep inside of me as a kid, I knew something was off. And then, of course, this carried on the way, same way, similar patterns. In my teens, I chose a career. I didn't just choose a career that would allow me to work with people, but I actually chose something that can throw me into a deep, superficial world.
Okay.
I had to create these environments for myself so I can be maybe fully indulge in these environmental, superficial environments, so that I can develop. I see that as my foundation. So I worked in the fashion and beauty industry for a very long time, and you can imagine that was eye-opening experience. When I was in it, I didn't realize this. Only when I came out of it, I saw the value in that experience. So while I was in it, I was part of it. This is the truth for all of us. When we're in a situation, it's very difficult to know that we're in it. It's hard for us to see from an objective bird's eye view. So we need to step outside to see what's going on. That's with everything in our lives, in our relationships, in the reality that we create. I think it's very difficult to see what's happening while we're in it. And so I did that. So that kind of that was my setting.
And so like that's a very special, if we talk about fashion and models and beauty and clothing, and we all have an association with, very strong disciplines around food and even food problems or psychological, I don't know whether you want to call it narcissistic behaviors, etc. So it's a very special, and I'm sure there are normal people in there too. Well, I hope so. I haven't been in the fashion industry. So having had exposure to that type of environment, when you left it, did you feel a change in, okay, the people I deal with now are different to what they were in the fashion industry? And what perspective had that given you, Susan?
So we don't live by choice. Something needs to crash and come down. Like we don't necessarily change the circumstances by choice. It's very, very difficult. When you're in it, you're so immersed and sucked into it. It's very, very difficult to counter. There has to be like a real force to counter this. And then, like I said, we usually go through an experience where it comes crashing down. This happened to me, and I had to leave the industry. When I left, went into a more crushing and burning situations where it was just like peeling the onion more. It wasn't done. There's more to it. I just kept following and following. At the time, it was all about cursing and resentment and bitterness, but only now realizing, wow, that was just me getting ready for what's to come now. Because if I didn't go through all of that suffering and the crushing and burning, I don't think I would be able to, I don't think I will be able to become the container as a therapist for other people who are going through the crushing and burning. So in order to be able to have the empathy and the heart-to-heart connection and to hold an authentic space and be a container for other person, you need to know what that feels like. So all of that experience was something that was preparing me for what I call what I'm living now. This is the reality that I created now. And I'm also, at the same time, not attached to this also, because I know this is a transitioning also. Like everything, we believe that this is it.
Yeah.
We have arrived. We've done the work. Doesn't matter how old we are. Doesn't matter even if we're in our late in our lives. It's still a transitioning period. So all of this gives me hope, peace, detachment. More authentic, I guess. So not identifying with what's going on. That's what I'm trying to say.
Sure, absolutely. It's temporary. All of it's temporary, and all of it passes. I recently watched again your video on London Real, because you were a big part of that, which is where I first saw you come into the limelight, Susan, in terms of media, etc. And watching your video, even from 3 years ago to the person I've got to know today, there's been quite a significant even transformation, at least publicly, in those past few years. And now you're into, well, I'm not saying they're new to you, but your participation publicly in meditation and psychedelics and the inner journey has definitely become, more known to us. And why did you pick those? Because, there's loads of options for people to find a solution. How was it just meeting a person? Because sometimes it's often just coincidence. We meet someone, they inspire us. Or what brought you into those two areas?
So I have, I love quotes. I use a lot of quotes to go deeper in myself. I found that some of these quotes that I share on my social, I'm actually thinking of creating like a PDF to share, which I think Tim Ferriss has got one. I think Tim Ferriss has got one saying 17 quotes that changed my life. I think I should do something like that because, like I said, there is a quote that I love. It says, the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow. I feel like the people, I mean, these are modalities. Let's just make it very clear to everybody that's listening and tuning in. Psychedelics are just another tool and a modality in self-development, but they're not just ordinary tools. They are extraordinary. So I feel like the deeper the pain, deeper the shadow, we usually tend to be guided, or at least cross paths with tools that are extraordinary. So I don't know why that is. Everybody has their own path and their own journey. I know that methods, like one method cannot work for, these two.
Sure.
Everybody. So we all have our own way of choosing our methodologies, tools that work for us. So mine, I crossed paths with psychedelics. It was just something that was calling. And the interesting thing is, the most fascinating thing for me is that growing up in London, I actually never explored or experimented psychedelics recreationally in my life.
Okay.
Even being in the fashion industry, for so long, I've never explored psychedelics, even recreationally. So when I did finally come across them as a therapeutic method, which means I don't carry the stigma, I don't have the negativity or what happened in the 50s. So I had to, people who really understand the counterculture, the 50s, a lot of us have a lot of stigma around psychedelics. I didn't have that because I wasn't even aware this was a thing. So for me, it's very easy to accept them as therapeutic tools. In fact, it's very easy for me to accept them as medicine. They are medicine.
So like for somebody, I've never done it, Susan. I've tried loads of things, but that's not an area. And so explaining to me, somebody who's never done it, I've seen a couple of movies, I've seen documentaries around Terence and a few different people who are sort of provocateurs around it. So for someone who's not aware of it and they see it as a therapeutic solution as you're presenting it, what might they expect, or why would they go and choose this as an option to look into?
So let's go back to the beginning. So a lot of you guys who probably tune in probably know, and now we're living in a digital age, so you're probably going to access a lot of information about psychedelics. So it is, it's very easy now to find out the history of psychedelics. But if you go back for millennia, psychedelics, so plant medicine. The term psychedelic is actually very new. The plant medicine has been around millennia, and the most fascinating thing, we have receptors that recognize the compounds in the psychedelics. So the chemical compounds in the psychedelics, we also have them. So it's almost like we somehow evolved with psychedelics. They're not new to us. And our biological and chemical system recognizes these and it uses them up so intelligently.
So I also follow one guy who I'm sure you're probably aware of, Sadguru, right? And he says he's continuously stoned. He actually says when he fasts for enough time that our brain creates something similar to DMT when you fast and you meditate for a certain amount of time. So I'm not saying it's exactly DMT, but our brain stimulates something similar, and that lucid clarity that you achieve also by plant medicine is something that we can also generate, not maybe exactly the same chemical, but something similar. So there's a bit of an overlap between meditation, fasting, how we use our body, and it. So what's its effect? As I've never taken it, Susan, and a lot of people who are here haven't. What's the effect when you do it?
So before we go into that, I want to say one more thing about the history of psychedelics. So, like I said, indigenous cultures, they lived side by side. Psychedelics were in their culture, and they use these medicines at festivals, transitions, rites of passage, death, birth, healing. You know, they never ever used this recreationally. They got it. They knew these were sacred substances, and they never abused it. They understood that you need to honor them and respect them. And one of the most fascinating concepts about plant medicine is that the indigenous people will tell you these are sentient beings. They have a spirit, and they are aware of you, and they know what you need. So now, coming back to the 50s, you know, when the psychedelics landed in the scene of the 50s, we didn't have the container. We didn't understand the culture. We didn't honor these as sacred substances. So a lot of recreational use began, and then of course the counterculture, and then it went quickly underground. And then of course, when this happens, things are taken out of context, a lot of stigma now, heavily stigmatized, you know, the war on drugs and all of this in the back in the day. So now coming back to Sadguru, I know he doesn't promote, or he actually says you don't need any substances, which is true.
Yeah.
Which is true. But what, see, you need to understand, Sadguru doesn't come from a Western culture. He's in my eyes, he's indigenous. Yeah. And doing his work, bringing his philosophy to the Western world. So the people, us in the West, our generation and the younger generation, we, you know, I call it the industrialized world. When this happened to us, one of the disadvantages is that we lost that connection. So, and the environment that we live in doesn't support us going through those processes that we can actually you know, connect with ourselves and then start producing DMT, because we all have DMT. Every, you know, living being carries DMT in their organism. So there's people like, even you know, the science would say the pineal gland releases DMT, but now they're saying no, actually even your gut, because we have 3 brains, the mind, the heart, the gut, and they all have these neurons, the cells, they're very similar. Each one operates differently. Now they're saying the DMT is produced by each of them too. So it might be true that we have DMT all over our bodies that can be released, you know, in situations. So we need to come back and understand why Sadhguru doesn't promote, because he doesn't need to. He's well connected. He gets it. He understands. He's an indigenous person, and it is very difficult for a westernized human being to understand what this is. How, I mean, since we're in a digital age, right? There's so many people out there, coaches, therapists, leaders, mentors, gurus, that tell us, connect with yourself and you'll be fine. But when you are conditioned human being in the West, you have a mortgage for 25 years, that anxiety will keep you awake at night. Forget connecting to yourself. You won't even, you walk through life asleep. You have debts, you have, you know, we have this environment, the consumerism environment is driving the Western model of life. There is no way we can sit and meditate and levitate. We can't. So psychedelics play a massive role here. It cracks us open. It shatters that thing. I call it crack us open because sometimes these conditionings and this consumerism mindset, the way we kind of programmed into this environment that we need to survive in, right? It's in a very protective shell. I call it self-deception. This needs to be cracked open so we can see that there is something else here. It is not just what I perceive. That's when the psychedelics play a massive role, cracking you up.
So I know, I like that. And you just reminded me of my childhood. I had a family who were always interested in, I'll call them exotic things, but I remember we grew up with dream catchers at the bottom of our bed. And, you know, my mom and my aunts would have been interested in, native shamans in North America or Indian gurus in the Ganges River. And if we talk about dream catchers, I know it's only sort of a few feathers and a circle and whatever, but for them, the importance of, it was a non-consumer product. You don't pay to go to sleep at night and dream a dream, but you would get up and think about, well, what did I dream in the morning and what did that mean to me? And we used to try and interpret that, because I'm pre-digital age growing up. And now I don't think that happens as much, Susan, because, the second somebody gets up, they're looking on Facebook or Instagram or before they go to bed, etc. So the time may be away from that digital part to actually have these discussions and eat the real experiences and talk about them or write about them, or when was the last time you got a written letter from somebody to say, dear Susan, here's what I've been doing, and that person probably sat down for an hour and told you what was going on in their lives. That part of it, what's the context of it? My understanding would be dream catchers has something to do with psychedelics, as in also choosing an animal. I did that years ago, and I remember a seagull was one of my 3 animals, and it's a fantastic way to use avatars in your life for what's happening, and it's all the pre-digital. How does that dreams and sort of animals and connection with nature play a role in this whole thing, Susan?
See, I'm not indigenous, although I have a lineage. I have a lineage actually, because I think my family lineage has something to do with Mongols and where the shamanism actually is born.
Okay.
So, but obviously that's way back in generations. But somehow we all have an innate knowing. All of us have it. Even doesn't matter if we live in a digital age. Therefore, so it's very difficult for me to say, let's just throw out the digital stuff and throw out the phones. And no, because I also am part of the Western or the digital age life.
Sure.
So, and I don't actually put it down, because I know that, sometimes, it's easy for older generation to watch and reminiscent and all those reminiscent and the nostalgia from the past.
Yeah.
It's like we don't want to let go of that, but the thing is, the nature of the laws, it's continual moving forward. So even if I was to write you a letter, you wouldn't enjoy it the way you would enjoy it 20 years ago. So we are now in a very different consciousness,
Sure.
We are continually being upgraded, whether through planets moving. Look, I'm not into astrology, but I know that it makes sense how, things are moving constantly. And there are laws of nature we need to adapt, which we do. And when we talk about, we pick up our phone when we wake up, that's fine. I don't see any issue with that anymore, because even 2 years ago, I would also make a list for myself.
Yeah.
First thing I'm going to wake up, I'll meditate, affirmations, I'll do this, I'll check my emails last. Now I'm living in a space from not attachment, not rules, not discipline, but from total connection. If we can get that, if we can just turn the switch to that total connection, we don't need these checklists. We don't need to we don't need someone to tell us what's good for us. There is a doctor called Matthew Walker. He's a professor of sleep. Okay. Neuroscientist. We all know that sleep is a big part of our lives, right?
Absolutely.
Is in we can't deny it, and he says everybody should get 7 to 8 hours of sleep every day.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done that for the last 3 years, and I've never been so alive, right? So not necessarily, okay, these are really good. I love science, I love modern medicine, I love everything about researching our biology, the metabolic system, and the chemical system. I love all of that. But when we truly connect to ourselves, we will read it. We'll say, yes, great idea. 7 hours, 8 hours, amazing. But you would also be okay to do what is good for you. So this is what I mean by the total connection from your heart, from your gut, your being. When we connected, we go with intuition, and our body is so super intelligent. Will tell us when do we need to rest, when do we need to eat. For example, food is an emotional need. Our body don't need food, actually. It's an emotional need. Things like that. So I think for me, awareness is the key now. So the more I can become aware and more connected, then I'm okay being in a digital age, super fast, hyper, there's a momentum. God knows what's going to happen in 10 years. We probably have flying cars and all of that, right? But even pandemic, this pandemic has been revolutionary. It's been revolutionary. I remember having gone through one experience about 2 years ago. It lasted nearly a year, and I call it Dark Night of the Soul.
Yeah.
That was my cracking moment to the actual reality. I look and read it now, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this applies now, today, to a lot of people. So pandemic for me, pandemic is the collective, cracking open moment. It cracked us open, and those people who, even if they are not interested in self-development, somehow they've been sucked into it. Somehow they've been reading and listening things that they've probably never spent time doing that before. So yeah, I know this has gone a bit kind of way out of your question, but what I'm saying is, I'm all okay with everything that's happening in the world, but I just want to be more self-aware. If I know myself, I'll be fine.
So I think that's the most critical thing, and it doesn't maybe matter what method or tool, Susan, is we want to connect, and maybe we're not always connected. We have moments where we get distracted, we get stressed, but regular activities that bring us back to that connection point. For me, it's actually running. I love when I go for a run, I'm breathing, I'm thinking, but I'm not actually thinking, I'm actually just steady, and I can run for miles just being in that meditative state. I'm not a sit under the tree type of guy, but I really change. It's like a refresh. It's a mental shower when I go for a run. And that's what I call a connection for me. And then I'm in a better place all the time. How do people now come to the point of saying, I need to put my connections, whatever that is for them, whether that's yoga or that's, meditation in some sort of way, put that as a priority in their lives? Because when we're in a better mental state and we're connected and we're aware, everything else seems to flow much better.
Yeah, it's true. But then I know many people who meditate and yoga almost daily and are very disconnected. So it's like, how can I say, sometimes, I also know so many people who practice meditation, but they are very frustrated because they're not really receiving the benefits. So of course, this has to do with a lot of things that are written and shared outside, because like you said, digital age, we access everything anytime. So I think someone like Sadguru, I don't know if you guys watch some of his videos where he goes into a trance.
I haven't seen those, no.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the thing. A lot of people only watch him when he speaks, and it's like a lecture.
Yeah.
And this man, of course, he's talking his truth, no doubt about that. But if you it's very interesting because this shows how much we value intellect in the West. I don't actually listen to Sadhguru because what he says is universal truth. Yes, we should all be, following that. But what I'm interested in how did he get there? What was the process? What did it look like? So I actually look at his story, how his wife decided to pass on. And I've seen videos of him into that deep trance state where I see a very primal man, full of fear, but he surrenders at the same time. He faces his fear of death, he faces himself, he faces the existential crisis, and then he surrenders. It's very primal, it's very scary. Not a lot of people will probably contain it. That's what I'm interested in. That's the level it takes to really connect to our own essence. And not a lot of us, firstly, not willing to do that because it's quite scary. Secondly, we have enough distraction in our lives to keep us away from that. We have enough dysfunctional relationships that we pay attention every moment by moment. We have enough distraction, like enough, you know what I mean, everything. It's just so much that it's enough for us to just stay where we are, but only keep wasting time listening to Sadhguru's truth. I call it waste of time because listening, because I have a theory that knowing is not doing.
Sure.
Knowing is not doing. Like we can, I mean, look at us. We became a collective Western people. We became like libraries in our house, libraries, books after books, self-development, video programs. It's actually quite insane. We have self-development programs for $27. We have about hundreds of them in our libraries.
Sure. But like I agree with you. Like for me, knowledge, I used to be a reader. I'm a voracious reader, 10 books even at the same time. But now I call knowledge is only potential power. Okay, we've got concepts, but unless you apply it, you don't have kinetic power, which is real power in some sort of way. So you're touching on something that I probably agree to some degree with the Sadhguru. It's the knowledge and the potential power. Somebody I've come across recently, Susan, is a guy called Kyle Cease. He was a comedian to start with, but now he's a transformational coach. And you said a phrase that he regularly says, which is holding space. And I've gone through the process of when I feel myself overreacting, I realize I'm defending a belief of some sort. And that means there's an emotion that I have suppressed or repressed or whatever and haven't let go. So I have to learn to live with it rather than I would have the tendency to be potentially over positive and kind of actually keeping those emotions down. Now when I feel that I'm actually having a reaction is I'm going to have to sit very uncomfortably now with this, whatever it is that I'm reacting to. And I have found that process so much more productive than just the reading of concepts, but actually holding on to those emotions, and they slowly, or depending on the actual item, dissipate. And I think that's and using the words, you're obviously very, very well aware of holding space, and you do it for multiple people. How important is that process, Susan?
Yeah, so I thank you so much. That was really great, because sometimes I forget that the self-work is a long process that, again, long process for some of us, maybe lifelong, and it can be an event for some, it depends. But here's the thing. I don't mind the process of having many books and attending webinars and courses. This is beautiful because we must have an outlet. We need an entry point. We must have an entry point, whether it's a person, a book, an event, something. It has to happen for us. But what sometimes we do as humans, we delay the process by making that an addiction. So we keep seeking for the next book. But for me, transformation is very primal. It's very primal, and it needs to be done very in solitude and in silence and inside of you. Like, we cannot transform ourselves by attending multiple workshops, retreats. They are just good for the moment. Like you said, sometimes you go for a run, you're refreshed, lovely. That's it. But the real lasting transformation happens very privately. And in that private time, you go through your own pain, all of that. I mean, I do a lot of posts about trauma and emotional pain, sometimes not received very well, sometimes received as negativity. But somehow we've been fooled into thinking that positivity is going to save us, that positivity is the key, which is true. But there is another layer of work needs to be done before we get there. Because once, the thing is, you know what really makes me, surprises me? A lot of there are a few people in the field that I love, and they're not very famous. Actually, like, their videos only been watched like 500 or 1,000 times, and they never talk about positivity. And then there are, countless gurus out there with millions of followers, and their videos and their content gets watched millions and billions of times. Everybody, see, that tells me we are so hooked on the result. We want the result without doing the work. We want to get there. We want to feel this. We want to separate ourselves from the pain. We want to change our reality like now. And we learn this because of living in this technological age. You don't like us, you watch a series on Netflix, you don't like it, you switch.
Sure.
Click of a button, you change. Life doesn't work like that.
Well, it's kind of like we want the dopamine hit for the aha moment.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily do we want the slow process of reducing the cortisol in our body by dealing with the emotions of stress and actually becoming consciously aware of them. A lot of people have said it, but I'm kind of a believer that we're addicted to certain hormones even with our own body, that we've a pharmacy there and we're sort of trying to get those old types of drugs, and it takes a lot to stop an addiction. That's what I would call it.
Yeah, and also look at the environment. I mean, all these things that we are indulging in, these are being calculated and presented to us by very intelligent people who gets the organism, how this human body works. Sure. And look at this consumerism. Look at this. Look at the world, how we've been environmentally conditioned to keep going that way. There needs to be a really serious counterforce to rip you out of this initially, so that you can then maybe take that solitude, in silence, do your work. But otherwise, we're just going to keep going, seeking, like you said, the next dopamine hit, next, where is it going to come from? So, holding space again. Yeah, let me tell you one thing about holding space. This is so important for everyone, honestly, who's involved in the conversation. Holding space just simply means meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
So also we live in a world where, what's the biggest distraction is? Trying to change the other, trying to change your wife, your kids, educate your kids, educate your mother, sister, brother, friends. We watch a video, we want to share it with the world, not even considering that this person may not be there yet, or they're not going to hear what I'm hearing. So we find this is like the biggest distraction in self-work. So holding space for me personally means that I will just hold space, meaning I will accept and meet everyone I encounter exactly where they are.
So does that mean then, Susan, I have all my rules in my head, even if they're not explicit, and what the tendency is to judge other people by my rules. I like when they behave the way I would behave or do what I would do based on what I expect of them as a role, and not to put those expectations on others and leave them free of our own, to stop projecting what we want them to do according to our rules. And we find that difficult to do, don't we, as a general population?
Yes. Well, this is part of the conditioning. Okay, what does it say? What does it tell us about our, childhood trauma or the developmental years? I mean, I spent a lot of years learning and researching and studying about childhood trauma.
Yeah.
So the one thing is sure now, one thing we know now, especially people like, Bruce Lipton and some of these teachers of our time, who studied this thing, we now know that 0 to 7 is a time where our blueprint is created, right?
Absolutely.
But like I said, after doing this for years and years and understanding, I realized it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that. So my most recent mentor and the teacher that I've been studying, called Stan Groff, he has a philosophy of perinatal trauma. So he divides the trauma of birth in 3 or 4 segments, and from the inception to the 9 months in the womb, and also the clinical birth process. All of these have little segments and sections where each baby goes through enormous trauma.
Yeah.
And this has never been considered before in psychology, in any modern philosophy, any modern understanding. So I think it's not as simple as oh, I learned this when I was a kid. Oh, this was the model I learned from my dad or my mom. Not really. It's so deeper than that. Wanting everybody to respect you, see you, accept you, validate you, love you. All these things that we seek externally, these are not just coming from our parents, actually. Understanding is a huge liberation. It could be ancestral, it could be collective, it could be, perinatal. We don't know.
So how do we, like a big part of what we want to do is improve ourselves. How do we find out, if part of it's 0 to 7, but if part of it is at least 9 months before, or even before that, ancestral in our DNA or in the energy that we come through, whatever it is, how do we go about, releasing those from our past if they're causing us problems in our day-to-day lives, Susan? And is that part of what's bringing you down your current track?
Yeah. So the thing is, right now for me, what's important right now is, for me, from all of these things that I've gone through, I think ultimately we're running away from the truth that we are perishable, that we are, the physical existence here is finite. And I think we've been living in amnesia to believe that we're infinite, which we are probably. But the thing is, I'm going to be brutally honest here, that I actually don't have a strong stance in beliefs like reincarnation,
Sure.
all of these things. Like, I don't know. I honestly don't know. Some people spend all of their life saying, oh, they're so clear and they're so sure why we are here and why did we born in this body, that you're Jonathan and I'm Susan, and so on and so forth. Like, they're so clear. Oh, I've been here before and I was this in my past life. I don't know. I truly have no idea, and it doesn't bother me that I don't know. So currently, what's important to me is that I know this is finite. I'm in a dream. I blinked my eyes and I was in my 40s. So which means this life is going to go so fast. So which means, can I connect with what's in front of my nose every day? I know it's difficult, but can I connect with people that I care about? Can I engage in things that I care about more? And can I sit in silence long enough so I can become more humble? I feel like because we are living in this whole indulgence of distraction, I feel like we don't have time to sit in silence to ask big questions. And also, like Sadguru's, that the experience that he creates for himself, those primal, those kind of experiences. I feel like sitting in silence is very scary because it confronts you with fear of death, fear of you being perishable, because the physical body is perishable.
Yeah.
I think knowing this in this deep down in our gut is quite scary for a lot of us. So we rather keep arguing with the partner, the parents, and this. We rather be spending our time doing all of that. Why? Because it takes us away from the real thing. The real thing is you're here, very, very short time, so finite.
Absolutely.
It's almost like when I hear people talk to me about how they are just had an argument with the sister-in-law and they just dumped their boyfriend or that, this and that, and their children don't listen, and I laugh. I'm like, well, keep creating those, because I have empathy. I truly have a deep, deep compassion, because facing our own mortality is so scary. So I know that place. For that reason, I find it like a little toddler acting out, because you don't want to grow up, you don't want to take responsibility, because Jonathan, to face ourselves, to face our own mortality, it means we have to grow up and take responsibility, and we don't want that, because living a whole life, a lifelong story, my parents ruined my life, is much more easier to live with, although it feels quite painful and depressive and anxious, like you said earlier, because we are addicted to our own chemicals and hormones.
Oh yeah, but I agree with the fundamental reason. When we wake up in the morning, we are a responsible human being. But then do we give away our power by blaming or complaining or gossiping or do all those things? I think that's literally not facing that fact. And I think that's what makes every day precious, Susan. And I also, from that point of view, the fact that people take their time to listen to other people's conversation and to truly engage in what we're doing, because we all have that same fundamental stance. We're here for a human experience. And I would like to say thanks, because I've watched your posts now for quite a long time as well. And I met you originally, we did some work together with respect to accountability, which is close to responsibility. It doesn't seem to go away, that responsibility element still, and maybe mortality seem to be at the core of the issues that we need to man up to or woman up to in the end of the day.
Yeah, accepting is a huge thing. And I feel like we're so good at distracting ourselves, and I don't know what this is about being human. You might call it the ego defenses, the ego mechanisms, or self-deception. I don't know what this is. There is this huge big thing within us that doesn't want us to accept that we're here finite, and our time is so finite, and that we need to grow up. It's like part of us don't want to grow up and don't want to face the real thing. And to a point where, we facilitated psychedelic retreats where people would come again and again and again, despite the suffering, because taking a big psychedelic trip is not fun. It's a lot of pain. And the fact that, we used to see people keep coming and but not really doing much with it, it's astonishing. It really is like, it used to fascinate me. Yeah.
Oh dear. I'm not sure if it's in my future. I'm very curious because I've seen a lot about it. I still have a question now, because we've hit on a lot of core issues, Susan. And I know a lot of people ask this one, but if you were to ask the young girl version of you, because we've all been through a series of things to come to these conclusions, what would be the little piece of advice you'd give to that younger Susan to say, here's one piece of advice to approach your life in this way? What would that be?
I don't know. You probably heard this one before. I don't think that little girl would care whatever I say.
Yeah.
I don't think she would take notice.
Just like, get lost, leave me alone.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, you take your own advice or something like that. I don't know.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
it's crazy. Mm.
So
But
I'd like.
it's true. Like, we need to go through a process of understanding, and that's where the conflict. I think, do you know what the real issue, or actually the real solution we need to understand? I think, in my own humble opinion, we need to bridge the actual process of becoming self-aware with a slow process, with patience. They say patience is still a virtue. It's still a virtue, honestly. And if you look at all the historical mystics, gurus, they've taken years to get to that point, right? So now I feel like we're in a hybrid reality. We have the digital age. With a click of a button, we can have anything we want. And yet we still need to take a long time with the self-work development, whatnot. And I think the biggest pain that people are experiencing currently, because they're so used to having things with a click of a finger or a button, I think they forget the self-work is not the same thing. And if we can bridge the two together and understand we're hybrid beings, separate the two, embody, embrace the long process of this, journey, and yet know that you're in also a digital age. Everything is hyper fast and super speed, and that's fine too. Know the difference and bridge it together. And one other thing I want to just quickly say, I think there was a story that one of my friends always tells us. It's so amazing. There's a nun who she spent like 40 years of her life in a monastery. And they said they wanted to ask her these big questions, and they said, so you spent 40 years in the monastery, so tell us what you learned. And they were expecting, like, I spoke to God and I saw angels, and she really thought and like took a moment to really think, and she said, well, I've learned how to eat and sleep. That was a shocking moment, because, do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So the biggest challenge for us is to accept that we are limited in this physicalness, the physical plane, and our main job is to make this physical plane or physical experience as smooth and as accepting, and that's the real work. Because it is now very easy, again, because of the digital world, it's very easy to find yourself in some groups where they promote esoteric philosophies, which is fine. That's absolutely fine. It could be a hobby of a lot of people and the interest, but there is this almost to a level where it's promoting that we can, transcend to the fifth dimension, forget the fourth dimension, the third dimension, let's go. It doesn't work like that. You're still in your body, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You reminded me of something from years ago. I heard the definition of intelligence, and intelligence was the capability of keeping two opposing opinions in your mind and staying calm. So if I think about the digital age and sort of the physical part of our body, we need to be able to maintain both of those environments and be okay with both of those and what are going on. I know I referred to sort of the pre-digital, and we've talked about the digital, but our life is a set of complex environments, Susan, and sometimes I think taking the choice to be a monk and go into a cave for a few years, etc., is almost the easy option. Try having a family, having a job, going and doing all your various activities and staying calm at the same time. I think that's a much more eye of the storm experience in some ways,
Yeah, exactly. And this is where we are at now. Since the pandemic, I think we're really getting it, that the work is messy and it needs to be done. It's very primal. this self-work that we call self-work is primal. It needs to be painful. It needs to be, it needs to happen in the physical plane, sure, in our day-to-day lives. And yeah, it's not easy.
Well, I think we've hit on absolutely load of topics, Susan, and I know from your own group that you do have fireside chats and you do have special guests in, and you talk through, we could call it philosophies and approaches to life in a very good way. Do you want to let people know where they can find you on the web?
Yeah. So I have, my website is psychedelicconversations.com. And I have 21-day meditation challenge Facebook group, which all came about when the pandemic hit us last year in March. I always wanted to come together with like-minded people and meditate together. And that was almost like it came true, because I realized there are so many people out there wanting to do the same. So this group is growing really fast, and we have amazing people. I facilitate sessions every Tuesday, like a 1-hour meditation.
Yeah.
So it's very simple. We come together, we say hi and quick updates, and then we sit together on Zoom for 20 minutes. So yeah, these are the places that they can find me. And I'm all over social media under the name of Susan Gunnar anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Susan. And I've known Susan now for a couple of years. I do recommend you follow. Her quotes are very inspirational, at least make you think and ponder about, how is that in my life? So I recommend you follow Susan on social media, join her groups if you wish, and we look forward to meeting again in the future, Susan. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Also for doing all of this work yourself. It's amazing. Thank you for inviting me. And so everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate you. Much love. Okay. See you soon.
Bye-bye. Take care.